Welcome to the Pitcher's Shop. This is where we discuss nothing but pitching, the physical, the mental, arm care, strength, you name it. Our goal is to help you and your overall pitching development. Sit back, listen, because you might just learn something. All right, welcome back. Here we are at the Pitcher's Shop podcast, and today we're going to dive in with Erik Wagle over at the Kinetic Performance Institute. And, we just wanted to again, remind everybody why we're doing this. We're trying to create a better environment for your overall development and give you different viewpoints on all different aspects of pitching to try to make you better as the individual. So, without further ado, Erik, how you doing over there today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So, the reason we have Erik on today is because he has a state-of-the-art facility for both pitching and hitting where they have a lot of technology. And we're going to get into that in a minute. Real quick, though, Erik, just a little bit about yourself, your background as kind of a player and a coach, and how you got into this field here.
Sure. Quickly, as a player, I was a pretty average college player. Played at San Jose City College, UC Riverside, ended up at Sonoma State, where I had the time of my life, and really at Sonoma State and kind of having the player-coach relationship that us players had with the coaching staff there is really what kind of shifted my attention to go into coaching after college, and having that player-friendly, athlete-centered approach that Sonoma State had. Coached 5 years at Live Oak High School, my high school alma mater here in Morgan Hill, where I still live. We did really well, won a whole bunch of league titles, won CCS championship my last year there. Moved on, did a couple years at San Jose City College, the last 2 years of that program before they dropped it because of some facility issues. But we did really well there, led Northern California in wins those 2 years. Pitching staff did well. Moved on to Cal State Monterey Bay, where myself and Walt White, who's still a head coach there, took over what was a fairly dormant Division II program, and we turned it around pretty quickly. We're nationally ranked within a couple of years, and now it's one of the premier Division II powers on the West Coast, and still have a great relationship with them. Send a lot of guys there. Did some associate scout work with the Dodgers and the Nationals, kind of sprinkled in that time frame, and was actually going to go that direction with my career after leaving Cal State Monterey Bay and moving back home here to Morgan Hill. There was a gap between me getting hired full-time by the Nationals, where we started running camps and clinics here in Morgan Hill under the Dub Baseball brand that myself and a couple of my buddies who were in town started up. And that all kind of organically led to where we're at right now. It really went really well at first. I have a passion for development and this area that I live in. So decided not to go into scouting and kind of just still stay in the coaching lane. Built Dub Baseball as a travel ball program, but also as a facility. We opened up our first facility probably about 10 years ago in a hollowed out barn that people thought I was absolutely insane for considering to be a baseball facility. We're there for a few years, went to a different place, expanded that place when my current business partner, Dan Kabulian, came on as a strength coach. And then during COVID, we were told that the building was sold and all the tenants had to get out. So it provided us an opportunity to rebrand, drop the Dub name, drop the team, basically affiliations. And we opened up our current location in KPI in October of 2020 in the middle of the pandemic, which was quite an interesting endeavor, but it actually worked out pretty good for us.
Very cool. It's funny you mentioned Cal State Monterey because I remember a long time ago when I was in high school and I actually went to a little camp there. Mm-hmm. And I was going, man, this place is sweet. Well, I wonder why it's not as on the map as it should be.
Yeah, it's a small school. They're growing. Obviously, location-wise, it's great. It's hard to build a university. Each one of those buildings costs $100 million, and in that place, it's weird because it's the old Army base. So there's the old stuff there, and then there's a lot of new stuff. I've been gone about 10 years or so. Even when you see it now, there's so much new stuff, and I really think Walt's done a great job there. He's an incredible coach. But I think just in the big picture, there's not a whole lot of reasons Cal State Monterey Bay won't look a lot like Cal Poly and kind of be that destination type school in the future.
Very interesting. So while you were there, were you dealing with mainly the pitchers?
Pitchers, and I was a recruiting coordinator. I mean, we took over a program that was 8-41 the year before, so there was just an incredible amount of work that needed to be done. And so, Wally's
Right.
an infield hitting guy, and he's a networker type recruiter. I was more of a pound the pavement type recruiter. So we had a good little mix, and it was just basically divide and conquer. There was so much work that needed to be done, and obviously we did it and set that program off on a nice path.
Yeah, no, very cool. And I imagine that just kind of things that you learned while you were there and implemented with your pitchers helped kind of inspire this direction. And like you mentioned, where you're going with KPI. So now when we go to the Kinetic Performance Institute that you have there in Morgan Hill, which is, for people that don't know, it's right around Silicon Valley in that area here in California. And I think you say you've got guys from all over, all over the Bay Area. I mean, how far are guys coming to join your program?
Pretty much all over. I mean, as far north as Marin, and these are people that come in house. We have our remote program as well.
Yeah.
But as far as people that come in house, Marin's about the northernmost athletes that come down east, into Sacramento. We have a couple kids coming down from Sacramento on the weekends right now. The East Bay is an area that we're really starting to get into. That Concord, Danville, quite a few kids from the San Ramon area coming on down. And then south, all the way to the coast. So Monterey, Salinas, so that's kind of our triangle. And then remote wise, we don't advertise it a ton. Our remote coordinator, Cam Crone, is incredible, but there's just one of him. So we keep our remote program about 20 athletes, and we haven't really expanded it. That's why a lot of people don't know about it, but we have kids from all over the West Coast, and really high level guys doing our remote program. So that's kind of our spread right now.
Very cool. And roughly, how many athletes do you have coming to that facility on a weekly basis?
About 300.
About 300. So yeah, that's incredible. And are you guys able to grow more? Just for guys that are maybe listening out there, it's like, hey, maybe I want to go to the KPI.
Yeah, I mean, this time of the year is obviously our slowest time of the year. It's like we're so busy from June through January, and then it's almost like instantaneously high school, college pro guys just vanish, and so right now, we do a lot of system building, a lot of catch up on admin stuff, a lot of projects that we do. And then the high school guys come in on Sunday. So Sundays are really crazy for us. The rest of the week is kind of like admin work and then youth and softball. But yeah, we are growing, as far as like our offerings, like that we currently offer. There's not a ton of room there. We're always taking new athletes because there's an inevitable ebb and flow. Really, our focus for growth is going to be expanding our strength program to maybe some different populations like other sports and stuff like that. And then, some online resources like coaching certifications, training, online training, potentially our remote program if we can get some more coaches trained and stuff like that.
Gotcha. Very cool. So now when we talk about your actual facility there at the Kinetic Performance Institute, what are you guys doing or offering, and why do you feel like more guys are coming to you? I know you have elite level coaching and all that, and that always helps. But is there something that you feel is a separator between your state of the art facility and maybe some others that are around there, and that's what's drawing people in?
I think there's two big separators for us. One is just we can give you everything you need in one location. So when you walk in that door, it's not I don't have my private pitching coach and then my personal trainer and then my physical therapist, and then maybe my advisor that helps me through these processes for the high level players. Everything you would need as a high level athlete, baseball player, when you walk in our door, you get. Every single one of our sessions is about 2.5 hours for our high school athletes. They come in, they go through a personalized warm up with a warm up coach in that area. All this is based on an assessment that we do. So everyone who comes into our building has to get assessed. You just don't sign up on your own. Right. And then they go through arm care. Even our position players go through arm care protocols. It's a passion of ours. They do an hour of skill work. So whether it's hitting or pitching, there'll be a different setup that day for skill. And then they do an hour of strength. We also have a wellness. Dan, our head strength coach, runs wellness. I do a decent amount of that as well. We are getting close to opening a PT clinic as well. So basically, everyone can have this really holistic kind of view of development, and you don't have to be chunked up and go in these separate places. And really what that creates is a system. we all have the same office and we all work together and we all communicate with each other instead of like having these different phases. And I really, obviously our technology, and I know we're going to get into that, is incredible. And we've built some pretty awesome systems around that. But I think that first phase of having a true one-stop shop, I think is really what is a separator for us, and why a lot of people are gravitating our way, on top of the results of the technology. And then the other thing is just good old-fashioned relationships. When the athletes come in our building, I think they're treated a certain way, and there's a really heavy focus on relationships and positivity and creating a really cool culture that, despite our technology and despite our incredible facility and despite our great systems, like that still is the base of what we do, is just form really strong relationships with the athletes.
Very cool. And if I didn't know that you would coach college baseball, I would be sitting here going, man, you sound just like a college baseball coach, creating your own program and talking about culture and all that stuff. So it's really cool, because it's good for people to understand, hey, the idea that you have from college baseball or even high school baseball of trying to build that culture and create essentially a one-stop shop for all of your athletes, and then building the relationships with them. That's what's important. And that makes any place, especially a program, successful, is to have that kind of mindset, and players feel that,
I agree. And it's really a heavy focus for us. Our hashtags KPI crew, we really treat our clients, our athletes, like a team. Obviously we're not coaching them on the field and stuff like that, but the vibe in our place is like, hey, this is our crew, this is our team, and that's very intentionally created.
Yeah, very cool. Definitely a one-stop shop right there. So that's awesome, and I like what you're doing, and the idea of just trying to get everything right there. So, hey, you guys have a question about this? Hey, go right over there. You go right over there. Not, hey, find it on your own and make some phone calls or call this. So that's, I think you're right. I agree with you. I mean, I know you know this, but I agree with you. That is a separator. And I think that's a very, very advantageous thing for you guys there. So now when you're, going back to like a pitcher's perspective, or focusing on pitching, when you're assessing a pitcher, what are you looking for? And is there anything that you see with these guys that are pretty common flaws, so to speak, as you're assessing them?
Yeah, obviously there's a wide range of athletes in our facility, and especially on the pitching side. We have high school guys training with us, and they're potential first-round draft picks this year. And then there's also the incoming freshman that's trying to make his high school team. And so we have to be able to really accommodate all those guys in our different systems. So we really try to get as much information on the front end before the assessment as we can, so we can prepare the right way for the assessment. We want to know injury history. We want to know level of performance. We want to know velocities, all those things, so we can really tailor the assessment to who they are. And it even can come down to who assesses you, or how the assessment is handled. We had a really high level guy in for an assessment on Sunday, and that assessment was handled much differently, because that guy's looking for a little bit more of management and like, hey, like, I'm preparing for the draft, this is what I need, versus maybe that other guy that just wants to gain 5 miles an hour so he can get to 80 miles per hour so he can have a chance to pitch for his high school. So we try to really individualize things as much as we can on the front end, and then once we get into that assessment, some of the main things that we look for pitchers, and again, this is very contextual, but I'm just kind of giving some basics here, would be hip orientation. Are they externally rotated? Are they internally rotated? What's their mobility in their thoracic spine? Can they rotate well? Can they separate their lower half and their upper half? Are they stable, or are they unstable in their core? All those things are different factors we look at. The other basic test we do is a shoulder mobility test. If they can't pass our basic shoulder mobility test, we start there with work on their mobility level of their shoulders. And then the final part of the assessment would be our force plates. So we use our force plates to not only assess them, but prescribe all their strength training. It's really a very nuanced system that we use. It's much different than other facilities that use force plates. Most facilities that use force plates just measure peak force output, and peak force output is obviously really important. But what we found is that there's a really more nuanced way to evaluate athletes. And athletes have different movement biases and deficiencies that the force plates can pick up. We want to train the deficiencies. What we have found, especially with high-level guys, is that they're already really good at producing force. That's why they're high level. And so just only training that can have some diminishing returns and actually open them up to some injury risk. So sometimes we find that they don't transfer force very well, even though they produce force really well. Sometimes we find that their timing of their force is really off, or the range of motion that they're getting into when they go through their jump training is off. So we try to take a really deep dive into the central nervous system and really train their deficiencies, not just go for peak force output. And that's really why we've moved away from velocity-based training and 1-rep maxes and stuff like that, because a lot of guys just don't need that.
Yeah. So I agree with you, especially on that last part where you're talking about velocity. I think that, velocity is important, especially in today's game, right? You've got to get some velocity in there if you want to have a chance to go to a higher level. But I think a lot of guys are focusing almost too much on just velocity alone, that they're not looking at the overall picture, right? That big picture of how we're really trying to develop a guy in his body so that he can continuously throw harder and allow his body to throw harder. And so all those measurements that you're talking about, and especially, with the arm, and are you trying to measure essentially the layback of the arm? I mean, are you guys actually measuring that, or is that something that, just because I'm just curious, or is that something that doesn't really matter, just kind of comes naturally with their shoulder mobility?
That's a fairly loaded question, but as far as like how we measure our arm care and stuff like that, we use armcare.com. We're an official performance lab for them. We were their first national performance lab, so we've been with them for about a year. And really, we were trying to develop this product on our own, and they're just further ahead with the technology and their system. So we kind of just went with that, and we've adopted their systems and then tweaked it to fit our needs. But basically, all of our pitchers come in and they do arm care screens every day. The basic arm care screen they do once or twice a week is what we call the full exam. And so they wear a dynamometer on their wrist. We measure internal and external rotational strength, scap strength and range of motion, and then grip strength. And really what we do is create a data baseline for where they're at. And then we're able, especially now, this is the most important time of the year for us to be checking in on them and their baselines, because now that they're accumulating game stress, with their pitching, we're able to see if they're off. And there's actually, one of our younger guys, but is very high level, and he's committed to a huge school. This is just an example of what we do. Most hard throwers, especially young ones, are more stronger in internal rotation. Makes sense. They drive internal rotation over and over again. He's gotten more internally rotated the last few weeks as he's been on the field. And we tested him on Sunday when he came in, and we've noticed the trend, and it's kind of coinciding the last couple of weeks with him having a little elbow pain. So what we do in that situation is we shut him down. We get him pain free. We prescribe a program for him to work on his external rotators and get more balance in his shoulder, and we won't release him to in-game pitching until he shows some balance, because basically he's knocking on the door of an injury right now.
Right. Okay. Yeah, no, and that's good. I think it's good for guys to hear, kind of what they need to be working on in terms of their arm, and especially how important arm care is. I don't think we can stress that enough, is that taking care of your arm. I think the biggest idea, at least in my opinion, is that, hey, understand your arm, like know your arm, and know the difference between pain and a little bit of soreness or a little bit of fatigue. And try to have that honest conversation with guys. So when they come to you and they say, hey, like that guy, hey, my elbow hurts, how do you guys handle that? I know you talked about just, hey, we're going to not release him to pitch, but how do you handle that when it comes with injury?
Well, we basically want them to be pain-free before we do anything. And then what we do is we dive into our system. So immediately we start pulling data. So we pull his arm care scores and his arm care history, and that's what we did the last couple of days. We pull his force plate data. There's a pretty prominent example of us last spring of one of our high-level guys starting to complain of forearm soreness. Later on in his year, he probably went a little too heavy, a little too quick with his high school team. And about halfway through the year, we saw some signs of him not only like verbally telling us he's breaking down, but then we want to always go the step further and pull the data so we can get some objective results. Because if we rely on a 16, 17, 18-year-old kid to accurately tell us exactly how he's feeling every moment in time, that's a losing proposition. They want to play. They want to compete. They feel pressure from their field coaches. So, we have to move past just them telling us they feel good, because they know that if they say they feel good, they get to play baseball, and that's what they love doing. Yeah. And so that's really where our systems come into place, and we kind of take over. And we haven't really caught a ton of resistance from the athletes and their families on this approach, because we do shut guys down with this approach, because we want to shut them down before they get hurt rather than react to them getting hurt. Obviously, field coaches don't love us doing that, but it's worked pretty well, and I think there's a lot of trust built up in families. But with this guy, same thing. Like, he started to complain to us about some soreness. We pulled his force plate data, and this kid's strong, like strong, and we
Yeah.
saw his force output was way down. We pulled his arm care scores, and we saw that there was some grip strength issues. So this was telling us, like, hey, like, he's basically in fatigue mode, and we know the vast majority of injuries are going to happen when they're fatigued and they try to throw through it. So that's kind of how we handle things. We get them pain free. We try to get inflammation out of there, and then we really use our data and our technology to evaluate where they're at. And then on the flip side, when we start bringing them back and returning them to throwing, we use that same data and technology to make sure that they're in what we would consider acceptable ranges.
Got it. I think what you touched on is really important for people to hear and understand. And that's one is the parents are listening to you guys, and the coaches, even begrudgingly, are listening to you guys because you've developed a good reputation and you've built that trust that they feel because you care about the player. And where I'm going with that is that now with some parents, because we've all, at some point in time, if you've been in coaching long enough or any kind of instruction, you're always going to deal with some or maybe even one or two that are going, hey, he needs to throw. I don't care what he's saying, he's got to throw. And I mean, how important is it for any of the dads or moms that are listening out there to go, hey, when your son has any kind of fatigue like this, it's really important to shut it down. And why is that so important? Just so they can hear it from an expert like you, is why they need to listen to their son and whoever is giving that recommendation to kind of shut it down.
Yeah, I mean, so we all know the arm injury epidemic. It's very well published. It's very well, in social media and in the mainstream news. The arm care epidemic we're experiencing right now in baseball. 60% of arm surgeries that surgeons are performing right now are on 14 to 19-year-olds. So, and that includes college and pro guys. So it's crazy, right? Like, it's startling numbers. So, and what happens is, the culture we're in, travel ball, and I'm not poo-pooing travel ball. High school coaches that throwing guys 2 times live to start the series, throwing the guys 80 pitches the first week, stuff like that. Like, those are really the things that are killing youth baseball right now, and leading to this arm care epidemic. And really, what people need to understand is that they're not okay all the time. And you can't just rely on what they say. I mean, I can't even tell you how many high-level 8th graders we see with little leaguer's elbow and little leaguer's shoulder. Like, it's almost like a rite of passage now, which isn't how it should be. And the narrative out there that the hardest throwers are at the highest injury risk, and they're probably just going to get hurt, and that's what happens to pitchers. Like, we don't accept that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we don't think that. Are some guys going to get hurt? Of course. The numbers are the numbers, and throwing a baseball overhand is the highest or fastest movement in professional sports. Like, we know these things. And so, like, we can't make anything 100% with injury risk, but what we can do is mitigate that risk as much as possible using objective data, instead of just opinions of a player, opinions of a coach, opinions of a parent. So really, what my recommendation would be to your question you just asked is, like, if a kid is feeling something, especially if the kid's high level, like, we know that, if you start reading certain velocities, like, you are going to kind of be at a little bit of an elevated risk.
Mm-hmm.
You have to listen to them, and you have to go find experts that are going to use data and have systems in place to kind of counteract what that athlete is feeling, because pain is the strongest determinant for an injury. If they start to feel pain, that means they're fatigued. That means they're outside of their range which is acceptable to them, and it needs to be addressed.
Yeah, would you say that the biggest reason that guys are having these arm injuries is just because they're not physically strong enough to handle the workload, and that's really the biggest contributor? They're just not in shape.
Yeah, strength matters most. Okay, like we know the vast majority of arm injuries happen because they're fatigued. Fatigue comes from not being strong enough to handle the stress that's placed upon it. So that's why in our place, like, strength training is the foundation of what we do. And our arm care. Good arm care doesn't look like rehab, and I think that's where arm care has gone, and it's really a disservice to athletes, is when we're doing super light loading to the arm and thinking that we're doing arm care. There's nothing light about the load an arm it has on it when it's throwing a baseball as hard as a kid can. Like, that is not light. So you have to use resistance training, smart resistance training, to build up load and capacity in the shoulder and the elbow, and that shouldn't look like rehab. It should look like strength training.
No, that makes sense. It's a great answer. Thank you for that. And as you're talking about these data systems, these programs, and all of that, is now I want to get into that technology side that you offer there at the Kinetic Performance Institute. And so, what technology are you using, and how are you using it to make these pitchers better?
Sure. Like I explained the force plates, and
Right.
that's kind of the base of our strength system. What we do with the force plates, like I said, is we take a deep dive in the central nervous system, we evaluate their deficiencies, and then we train that. They jump every day they come in, so we're constantly getting data. I think we're close to 500,000 jumps now since we've had the force plates, so our data averages are really, really strong mathematically. We
Yeah.
want to get into the millions so it can be even stronger. And then we evaluate their force plates every 3 to 4 weeks. Our strength coaches go in, they look at the jump profiles, they see if there's any moving happening in their force profiles, and then we'll change their programming. Each of our strength systems has 10 progressions in it. And so we'll progress them. Or what we see a lot too is over time, especially the athletes that have been with us for a while, their profile changes, and we'll see their jump profile start to move around based on puberty, based on stress levels, based on strength gains, stuff like that. And we'll actually change them to a different group at that point in time. So it's this constant check and balance. And that's kind of the cool part about our force plate system, is that we're using them so often that we're able to see the trends tweak, especially our primary population is high school. So they're going through puberty, they're becoming, so they're becoming a man. So they're going to change a lot. We need to adjust our programming to reflect how they're changing over the course of their training. I explained the arm care sensors that we use. All the
Right.
pitchers go through that every day. It's either a full exam or sometimes we just do an internal external primer. And it gives us a baseline of how they're internally externally rotating. That test is really quick. It also gives them a nice calcium burst in their soft tissue, so they can kind of be a little bit more prepped for doing throwing. So they do either a full arm care exam or a primer when they come in. On the pitching side of things, we have 2 TrackMan that we use. For those that know, TrackMan is pretty much the gold standard in the industry for ball flight. We have a ton of ways we use that. Obviously, some of the basic things that we do for pitchers is we evaluate their fastball movement profile. If they're a north-south guy, if they're getting rise on their ball, we want them to throw bullpens working up in the zone. If they're an east-west guy, if they're more of a sinker type guy, we want them to throw bullpens that reflect that they should be down in the zone the full time. And then a lot of the guys fall in that hybrid category where their vertical and their horizontal break are fairly even. And so that's the kind of guy we're going to practice going up and down in the zone in. But the guy that has 22 inches of vertical break should not be throwing the same bullpen as the guy who has 10 inches of vertical break, but he has 20 inches of horizontal break. Like, those are 2 very, very different profiles for pitchers. They should be throwing different bullpens. So that's kind of one of the really, really basic ways we individualize things. And then we also take, obviously, changeups and sliders and curveballs, and we evaluate them on our technology, and we try to build a pitch design, really a holistic look at pitch design. I think pitch design's gotten really off the rails, if I'm being honest. I think a lot of people have seen some of the big players in the industry and some of the data they publish on some of the YouTube videos, like sliders, for example. Like, a lot of people think they need to push the horizontal break on their slider out as much as possible, and that more is better. That's not the case. I mean, it really it's very nuanced. It has to do with the individual pitcher. And their best slider might be a gyro slider that's 0-0, 0 horizontal, 0 vertical, but they throw it hard and they spin it. There's guys in the big leagues, a whole bunch of guys that throw that slider. So it's really, really contextual. And I think programs and systems that only try to push out, it's too simple to just try to push out and make the numbers bigger. I think it's a lot more contextual for each pitcher.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think it's interesting just going off that slider, because I've seen more and more on social media. Hey, I'm going to try to get this really big sweeping slider, and I just want
Yep.
to see how much I can make that thing break. And in my mind, I'm sitting there going, okay, yeah, we want a lot of movement, but at the same time, that means everybody has to throw it exactly the same and throw from the same exact arm slot. It doesn't make any sense to me. My opinion is that, hey, we need to try to make sure we've got good tight spin on that slider and throw that thing hard as we can, and kind of see what movement you have based off of how you're throwing, how it's coming out of the hand. That may be, that may not be 100% correct, but that's just how I kind of view that. We shouldn't be chasing these pitches that some guys are throwing. I don't know.
Exactly. And what we see a lot too is that, like, if you go chase, like using that sweeping slider, for example, and you get into a supination pattern where you're getting on the side of the baseball a ton and that's not your normal pattern, now all of a sudden you're going to start cutting your fastball and you're going to lose
Right.
vertical break and velocity on your fastball. Or the one we see a lot too that a lot of facilities are doing now, just because someone published an article that said you should get more vertical break on your fastball, is guys are chasing the higher arm slots and trying to get into those 20 inches of vertical breaks because they think that's how they have to be. And now
Right.
what happens is your hand position gets screwed up on your other pitches, and you're not able to get your middle finger through the slider, or your changeup also isn't going to run now because you're right below the baseball and you're not pronated on time. So again, it's everything's so contextual, and nothing's as simple as it wants to be, as everyone wants it to be. And in the culture we have now of social media and YouTube, someone clicks on one article or watches one YouTube video and they take it as gospel, and then all of a sudden they go in on this one concept, and that's just not how the human body works.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting, because you're exactly right on that. I mean, we're seeing guys that are all trying to think that they have to throw a certain way, and it's almost like cookie cutting guys, and it takes away that somebody's own identity, that individuality as a pitcher. And I think it's important for guys to understand it's okay to be different. We want you to be different. You look at the guys in the big leagues; not everybody's throwing the same. I mean, there's all different types of slots and different types of bodies with the same underlying mechanics. One thing that I wanted to go back to that I found really interesting that you said was, you're talking about the guys with a lot of vertical break, 22 inches, and then the guys with 10 inches. And so you're talking about north-south guys, east-west. So for people that may not understand, north-south is obviously high and low, and then east-west is side to side. So you're talking about, how do you figure out a guy's going, hey, he's going to be a more north-south? How are you making those bullpens different for those two types of pitchers?
Really simple. What we do with the north-south guy is we really have them practice throwing up in the zone a lot. I think we do a really large disservice, even at the upper levels of the game, telling guys to throw the ball down all the time.
Yeah.
If a guy's getting 18 plus inches of vertical break on their fastball, they should 100% be practicing throwing up in the zone a lot. 70% of swings and misses in the big leagues, best hitters in the world, 70% of their swings and misses happen at the belly button, and up. Watch Justin Verlander in the World Series last year. Go back and watch the tape. He's throwing 93 miles per hour at the belly button every single pitch. Like, literally every single fastball is at the belly button. There's a reason for it, because his fastball plays up there. And so we want guys like that to work on it. And we've had to kind of undo a lot of ingrained patterns from every little league coach and high school coach telling them to throw the ball down. If you tell a guy with 20 inches of vertical break to throw the ball down and that thing leaks up to thigh high, he's actually going to get touched up pretty good, because the vertical break doesn't play at that elevation. The vertical approach angle's too high. I guess too low, if you look at the negative numbers. And then on the flip side, taking an east-west guy, a guy that gets very little vertical break, but he can really push out horizontally, he should never practice throwing the ball up in the zone, because his horizontal break is going to flatten out at the top part of the zone. So we want to maximize that sink and that run, and he should only work on throwing at the bottom of the zone. So that's kind of, that's a real basic way we use the fastball movement patterns to program out their sequences. And then obviously the pitch design around that is very contextual.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, a long time ago when I was pitching, I was that east-west guy. And my coach would say, hey, throw it up in the zone. And I'm sitting there going like, man, dude, I'm not very good. So if I throw that thing up in the zone, it's going to get crushed. And sure enough, it would flatten out a little bit and I would get crushed. But if I stayed as that sinker slider guy down, that, I had more success than trying to get up there. So,
yeah, and last on that point, taking those hybrid guys, those guys that have even movement patterns, those are the tricky ones. There's a lot of new, I guess, publications and stuff being put out there right now that guys that have that even movement pattern, that have that vertical approach angle from 6 to 10 degrees, that those guys need to pick a side. Like, they need to either go east, west, or north, south. I've pushed back on that really hard. There's guys in the big leagues making $20 million a year that are what we would call hybrid guys, that have even movement patterns. And they've just figured out how to use their arsenal. So I get what people are saying when it's like, well, that's, the whole 6 to 10 degrees vertical approach angle, like, hey, that's what hitters want to see. That's what they're used to. Okay. Like, I get that, but that doesn't mean you just change a kid because that we know hitters like that. That doesn't mean that kid has to be different. Like, that kid can learn how to use his movement pattern to be successful. You don't have to change it.
Right. Pitch to your own identity.
Yeah.
Um, as best you can, and fairly simple in simple terms for people that may not understand what you're talking about with 22 inches of vertical break, in vertical break, horizontal movement patterns. Can you just explain that real quick and so they kind of can get a better picture?
Yeah. I mean, so just really basically, when we throw a fastball, it rises. Okay. We don't visually see it rise because of the slope of the mound and gravity, but it does rise. So you are inducing backspin on the ball. And guys that hands are usually a lot more below the ball. They're a lot more over the top, usually, not always, but usually, are going to create backspin as the ball comes out of their hand, and it is going to rise a certain amount. On the flip side, guys that are usually lower slot, not always, but usually, they pronate out and they're able to kind of create some side spin when they throw their fastballs. And those guys are going to get more of that run with that ball spinning on a side axis or a vertical axis. And they're gonna push out and create more horizontal break instead of that vertical break. There are the outlier guys that throw from low arm slot that get a lot of vertical break. Those are the guys that teams are starting to figure out are really, really desirable. Think like Pedro Martinez, Josh Hader, like those guys that get down here to low slot, but they're still able to create a lot of backspin. Perceptually to a hitter, like that's like pure hell to them, like they can't handle that, because when they see a low arm slot or they see our arm slot, they perceptually expect a certain thing to happen. And guys that can kind of get outside of that a little bit can really mess up a hitter. And that's really the kind of the cool part about pitch design and using technology to measure all these things is like we're able to take some of these guys and figure out like, hey, like you do this one thing that we know hitters don't like. Let's go all in on that a little bit more. And it's really created pitchers out of guys that maybe because the radar gun didn't say they were elite, they figured out a way to be elite.
Yeah. No, that's great. Great explanation right there. And just going off that last part of where they may not be, for guys that are listening, that may not be just blowing up the radar gun. And it's all about figuring out one pitch maybe or something that you can do, which sounds like that's what you're doing. So it's a good thing for those guys to hear that just because you're not 90 plus, it's, you guys are getting out or you have to develop something that's almost like an out pitch that hitters really don't like facing. And so are you kind of seeing, is there any kind of shift to where instead of everybody's just chasing the velocity, they're actually starting to chase maybe more guys like that don't throw as hard, but they're able to get guys out effectively? Or is it still, velocity's king and everybody's kind of looking the other way? It's tough. It's tough. But...
I think the answer is yes to both those things.
Yeah.
Velocity is still king. It's still the number one determinant of success at the upper levels of the game. It's still the ultimate filter. You do need to throw hard if you're going to advance for the most part. You can't really get away from that. And it'd be silly for us to shy away from that. We do train velocity in our place, and I think we're pretty good at it, but we do it the right way. We do it with strength training. Like there are ways to manipulate velocity and stretch out ligaments and get them to throw harder quicker. It's not safe. And so we try to do it the safe way over a long-term approach to this. But what I will say, there are not a lot, but certain colleges and more pro organizations now that are really starting to lean into this stuff. I was on the phone with one of the best mid majors on the West Coast that does an incredible job of developing pitchers, and I was talking about one of our freshman arms. This kid, his velo's solid. He's low to mid 80s as a freshman, so he's definitely in a good spot. But he can run it 20 inches horizontally either direction with his fastball change up and then a slider going the other way, and that's kind of outlier stuff. And so, I told him, I said, hey, like some of the big schools are going to miss on this kid because he's not just lighting up the radar right now. And I know you appreciate this and you're going to want this kid because of this outlier movement profile. And he goes, yeah, don't tell anyone that. Like, I'd rather keep that a secret that we're looking, and this school produces pitchers for the draft at a higher rate than any school on the West Coast. And they're not a Power 5 school. And then same thing with the pro orgs. You're seeing a lot of orgs kind of lean in, and especially a lot of our guys over the last few months have been going through that process of having the scout meetings and turning in reports, and obviously there's scouts talk to us a lot about these guys, and there's certain orgs that ask certain questions about what they do, and you can just tell that they're looking a lot deeper into this than just like, oh, does he throw 95?
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I think that's what's great about your facility and with that technology is that there's a lot of guys that I've talked to that are like, oh, the technology, it almost hurts guys more than it helps it, because some guys, they're just worried about the number, but it's because, in my opinion, they're not using the right technology. They're not measuring them the right way. And that, when you're just measuring velocity on, say, like a run and gun, which I don't necessarily agree with that thing, so to speak, but or just gunning a guy in the bullpen, and they see the numbers there and get discouraged. But yet, if you're able to have a program and create that culture like what you're doing there, and measure all of those numbers in all aspects of their development, it paints a better picture, and it makes more sense to them, I think, is what you're saying. So.
Oh, I agree, and they still want velocity, and it's still the most important thing to them. I think something that makes us different, and I think the good facilities and coaches are doing this, is they use that carrot, they use it as sugar. Like I'm going to give you the rest of this stuff, but I'm going to include your velocity training into this, and it kind of helps the pill go down for them to work on some of these other things. And that's really kind of a strong focus for us. Is like the arm care stuff that we do. Like a good example of that is we're using some AI stuff right now where we're correlating their arm care score going up with an increase in velocity. And then now we show the kids that. Now it's oh, sweet. Like, I want to do my arm care now. Like, this is going to help me throw harder. So they all want to throw harder. There's no way around that. But we can kind of add in this other stuff in that quest for them to throw harder that we know internally makes them better and healthier.
Yeah. It's all about finding how can you make something cool to the kids, right? Like, hey, this is cool, man. Look at this arm care. This is so cool right now. And you want to do it because you can tie that into velocity. And now that helps them buy in. So genius. Great point. And so we're going to kind of finish up here. And the last thing is just, is there any kind of advice that you have to pitchers who are in high school of what they should be focusing on, as they're trying to chase that dream of getting to pitch at a higher level?
One, focus on your development. I think a lot of pitchers get washed out, and they don't ever make it because they have this short window to focus on the right things and get better. The early commits to the Power 5 schools, those guys are on that path, and they're going to do that no matter what. The focus is different and we have a whole bunch of those guys at our facility, and our focus is different for those guys. They're managed differently. But for the vast majority of the high school guys that are trying to make it, get to the college level and be successful high school pitchers, don't go to every showcase. Don't worry about what someone tweeted about you. Go all in on development, because we know that there's certain baselines you have to make from a velocity point of view, from a physical size point of view, from a movement profile point of view, that the guys at the next level get to, and you have to try to get there. When I counsel families on the recruiting process, it's a very consistent theme. Like, hey, this process is much easier when you're good enough. This process is hard. If you're a pitcher throwing 83 miles an hour and you're right-handed, and you're trying to make it to the college level, this is going to be really difficult if you stay at 83 miles per hour and you're 6 foot, 160 pounds. Like, this will be difficult. If you can push your velocity into the high 80s, low 90s, and you're healthy, and you're 6 foot, 190 now because you gained 20 pounds of mass in the offseason, like, now this process becomes much easier. And it has nothing to do with a showcase. It has nothing to do with the scouting service. And so I would really, my advice for young pitchers trying to make it is get into a program that values the things and can train you in the things that's going to get you to the next level. Exposure is not the problem these days. Everyone has a cell phone. Everyone has social media. Every single kid in the country can get in front of every coaching staff in the country in literal seconds. So that's not an issue anymore. Really, the issue is being good enough and being different than the guys you're basically competing against for roster spots at the next level.
I think that's great advice. Absolutely great advice. I agree 100%. And then that idea of, hey, showcases and all of that stuff. I mean, hey, if you want to go to one or two of them, great, just to kind of get out there and be seen. But like you said, I mean, my thing is always, if you're good enough, somebody's going to find you, right? And so focus on you and your development. And especially if you're 16 years old and you're 6 foot, don't compare yourself to someone who's 6'5" and 18 years old and growing harder and outweighs you by 30 pounds. Right. So it's, but it's tough in this day and age with all the social media. So, but anyways, hey, Erik Wagle, over there at the Kinetic Performance Institute, we thank you so much for your time today. And I know you have a very busy schedule, and just what you're doing over there in Morgan Hill sounds like such an incredible program that I almost wish that when I was younger, I was able to attend something like that. So, where were you 20 years ago? But you're on the right track, and I know that you're doing things right there and really helping guys in their overall pitching development. So we thank you for coming on today.
I appreciate you having me on. This was a blast, and yeah, love doing it.
Beautiful. All right. Well, hopefully you guys took something away from today and that you can use in your overall development and your weekly or daily routines as you're trying to get better with your pitching performance. So check us out, YouTube, Twitter, at the Pitcher Shop, and of course, check out our other podcasts. You guys have a good one. Well, I think that was some really good information there. And it was really cool to hear about the facility that he's built and how they're expanding. And there's just so much more interest in going down there. And you know, Coach Wagle, as I think everybody should refer to him as, because he's a phenomenal coach, does a great job with running that organization. And that culture that's there is really run just like a program. And so, again, that state-of-the-art facility, if you're around the area, Bay Area, in California, even if you're outside of California, check out the Kinetic Performance Institute in Morgan Hill. So we thank Erik for his time. He was very generous with that. So if you're going to join us next week, we've got a great guest. His name is Johnny Tucker. Johnny Tucker went to De La Salle High School, the University of Florida, and then now he is the minor league hitting coordinator for the Pittsburgh Pirates. So he is running all of those teams at the minor league level. He's in charge of hitting, and it's really cool to hear his perspective on pitching, whether it's through base running, that he used to steal a lot of bags, and what he used to look at, and then now those conversations that they're having in the professional games or in the dugout on what they're looking for, what guys are throwing. Just being able to hear those conversations, I think, will help make you better as a pitcher, to know what those hitters are trying to do against you and what also makes them feel uncomfortable. So again, tune into the next episode with Coach Johnny Tucker. He is the minor league hitting coordinator for the Pittsburgh Pirates. I think it's going to be a fun one.